So it was 8 years ago that I actually sat in this auditorium for the first time. And I was actually a newly admitted MBA student here at the Wharton School. And to be honest, I was completely intimidated. I felt like everyone in the room was smarter than me. I wondered how I got in. And largely that didn't change over the 2 years I was in grad school. So it's only appropriate, I guess, that I'm back here again, completely intimidated. So, but I'm excited to be here because I want to share something that has transformed my life. As an entrepreneur and here studying at Penn, I learned the principles of business. And what I've recently discovered is that those same principles are applicable to my personal life as well. And what I want to share is how I use some of these principles to transform my life and the life of my family. So I'm going to start by sharing a quick story. About a year and a half ago, my cousin and I, along with a couple entrepreneur friends, decided that we wanted to kayak from Cuba to Florida. And this was a 35-hour paddle over 124 miles. And so we began training, oftentimes waking up at 3 a.m., paddling till sunset, sometimes paddling through the night into the next day so that we could understand truly what it felt like to paddle without sleep and with very little food. So when we left Havana, we felt prepared. This turquoise blue water of the Caribbean Sea was welcoming us into this Florida Strait. And that's where we made our first critical error. My cousin and I made a last-minute decision that we didn't want anything to do with our support boat, that we could do this unassisted. And while the support boat would be kind of escorting us along with the other kayaks, we weren't even going to touch the boat. And so we made a commitment to each other, we wouldn't even touch the boat. Well, that night, after the sunset, everything changed. We were about a third of the way through the journey, and a huge storm rolled in. We could see lightning striking all around us, and we ended up getting asked by the captain of the boat, everyone to get as close as possible to the boat so that we wouldn't be lost at sea. And during the chaos of the storm, our kayak ended up getting squeezed in between one of the other kayaks and the support boat. A huge wave came and slammed our kayak up against the side of the support boat. And that's when I heard this crunching sound of fiberglass, followed by this terrified scream. And I can still remember those sounds. Instinctively, we wanted to take our hands and we wanted to violently push away from the boat to get some distance. But instead, we did nothing because we'd committed to each other that we wouldn't touch the support boat. So the second wave came, and this time as it slammed us up against the support boat was also coming down from another large wave, as if it had been dropped from this crane. And it landed on top of us, and we spent the next 2 hours treading water, trying to salvage our damaged kayak. In the end, the kayak broke in half and sank to the bottom of the ocean. And so we were fortunate that we ended up having an additional kayak on our support boat. And so we were able to go off and complete the rest of the paddle eventually. But what we did is we'd compromised our safety and the primary objective because we were completely distracted by a goal that was really unimportant. And the reason that I share this story is because this is what happens in life. Oftentimes, we're distracted by things that are unimportant, and we forget the primary objective. So as an entrepreneur, I've learned this lesson. And it's true what they say about entrepreneurship. It's full of the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And I've certainly had my share of both. Some of the highs include having Brazil Startup of the Year. More recently, I actually was the CEO of the Year, nominated CEO of the Year by the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. But I've also had plenty of very low lows. including the loss of a lifelong friend who was my business partner for 10 years due to a failed business partnership. That was 4 years ago, and still now it pains me every time I think of it. But I think maybe the most valuable lesson I've learned as an entrepreneur is the critical importance of company culture, organizational culture. I've learned that you can either create culture by design or by default, meaning that you can either do it intentionally or you can just let it kind of happen organically over time. So my first two businesses, the culture was largely created by default. We didn't really know what we were doing at first, just starting a business. But this last business I did completely by design. We built a culture that was about giving and serving. And we ended up creating a really special company where we employ refugees, we use our profits to support poverty alleviation, and we use our supply chain to impact lives throughout the world. And it's truly become something that's been very special for me and just a truly remarkable experience as an entrepreneur. But about 2 years ago, I was driving home, and I realized that I wasn't following my own advice, the advice I was giving to many other entrepreneurs about creating deliberate cultures in their organizations. When it came to the culture of the organization that mattered most to me, I had left it to be completed really by default. And that was the organization of my own family. And we had some strong traditions and some values that we followed, but it wasn't done intentionally or by design. So my wife and I, we got together and we started brainstorming what our core values would be. We actually got our two daughters in the room and we asked them what our core values should be. And we ended up deciding on 5 core values. And the reason that I felt it was important to start with core values is because I believe in this quote by Rohan Dredge that says, "Core values determine culture, culture determines behavior, and behavior determines outcomes." And so I believe that if we defined our core values, we could shape our culture and our behaviors and ultimately the outcome of our family. So we came up with these 5 values, and we actually assigned each of those core values to a letter in our last name. My last name's Smith, S-M-I-T-H. And so we have these core values, and attaching them to our last name made it easier for my daughters to remember, and frankly, easier for us to remember. And we actually put those values up on our wall. And I want to tell you a little bit about these values because I want to tell you about the impact that it's had on our family's culture. And so one of our core values is intellect or education. It's about constantly being intellectually curious. And what I found is that by default, we ended up on the couch watching Netflix. Probably like many of you. But I wanted to change that. So I wanted our family to be focused more on how we could learn. And so we ended up putting a goal together where every Sunday afternoon we'd spend an hour together, we gather all of our pillows and our blankets and we cuddle up together and we all read for an hour quietly. And at the end of this hour, we share with each other what we learned. And what I found is that this has totally changed the behavior in our household. Instead of ending up on the couch watching Netflix, our family is constantly reading, looking for opportunities to learn. One of our other core values is travel. So my family moved to the developing world when I was 4. And my father was an adventurer. And so we spent time building our own raft and floating down the Amazon River, fishing for piranhas, or going and surviving on uninhabited islands with spears that we'd made ourselves, spearing fish. So I grew up loving adventure, loving experiences, and valuing those over things. My wife is half Filipina. She was born in the United States, but had also this really deep cultural experience growing up. So this is something that we valued, and we've ended up living in a number of different countries, including with time with our children. And so this is something that we decided was important to us. And so now I have a great excuse. Every time one of my daughters says that they need the newest version of the iPhone, I just tell them that's not one of our core values. So instead, we use that money to go have experiences together. One of our other core values is hard work. And so this has been amazing. We actually sat down with our kids and we talked about the chores that had to be done around the home. And of course, we've been doing this their entire lives, but always failed miserably. But when we did this after determining what our core values were, we saw a small miracle. Our children no longer complained having to do these chores. It was an expectation that was set. Even my oldest daughter, she's 13, she started asking about how could she go get a real job? And so she now works at Cotopaxi, my company. She works there twice a week after school. She's our janitor, and she's really good at it. And we actually I've seen that she's developed these great values of hard work and of responsibility and learning to save her money. She values money more now. And so this is something that has been really fun to see, this transformation in our family's behavior. The last core value that I want to talk about is one of the core values that probably matters most to me, which is the core value of selflessness and service. And so we'd identified as a family that we were really passionate about the refugee crisis that was happening across the world. And we started looking for ways that we could get involved. And so we started getting to know refugees in our local community, inviting them into our home, spending time with them. And what we've learned is that we actually get more from the time we spend with them than they would ever get from us. My wife and I, actually, our most memorable wedding anniversary was spent serving refugees until late in the night. And in the last few months, I had an amazing experience where I actually went to Jordan at a refugee camp called Zatari on the Syrian border. This is the fourth largest city in Jordan. It's 83,000 refugees living in this camp. These are people that have arrived with absolutely nothing. They've lost everything. And when I was there with the United Nations Foundation's Global Entrepreneurs Council, a group of 8 entrepreneurs. And we spent the entire day working and learning from these entrepreneurs in this refugee camp. There were 1,500 small businesses that were built in this refugee camp. And it was just heartbreaking to be there, but also so inspiring to see these entrepreneurs, women sewing dresses, men making furniture out of scrap pieces of wood. But I think my favorite moment was actually spending time with the children. I remember towards the end of our time there, we were standing there, and instinctively a little boy grabbed my hands and started walking up my legs and up my body, and then did a little flip. And this is something that I do with my daughters. I'm sure many of you have done it with your own children, or maybe with your parents when you were younger. And pretty soon, all these little kids started lining up to do the same. And it was great. They actually would respectfully take off their shoes every time, but before long, I had these dusty footprints all the way up my body. And for a moment, it seems that we forgot we were in a refugee camp. But that night, I could hardly stop thinking about these little kids that I'd met, that had been sentenced their entire childhood to live in a refugee camp. And they weren't too dissimilar from my own daughters, my own children. That night, as I was in my hotel room, I turned on the TV and I saw an image that many saw across the world, an image of a little boy named Amran, who was bombed in Aleppo. His brother killed in the bombing, and as he was placed in the back of this ambulance by himself, he reached up and touched his face and was surprised to see blood, which he then wiped on the chair of this ambulance. When I saw this image, it broke me inside. And I really, truly felt the urgency of the work that we have to do. We have a responsibility to make this world a better place. And I'm glad that I've been able to help my children feel this passion that I have and help instill a little bit of it in them. So my question for you is, as you look at the relationships that matter most to you, have you built that culture by design or by default? And if it was done by default, which it most likely was, I challenge you to actually do it by design. It's never too late. Sit down with a person or people that you love and identify the core values that matter to you. Narrow it down to 3 or 5 of them and brainstorm activities, rituals, traditions that you guys can ingrain into your personal lives. And as you do that, I promise you that you're going to find a more deliberate culture, better behaviors, and a better outcome. And as the unexpected storms in life come about, as a large ship maybe bears down upon you, hopefully you'll have the vision and the courage to reach out with both hands and violently push away. Thank you.